Thank you very much for being here today. My name is Luis Velasquez, and today we're going to talk about stakeholder-centered coaching, which is a measurement-based approach to coaching. The stakeholder-centered coaching is the brainchild of Marshall Goldsmith, and I would like to show Dr. Goldsmith by showing a very short video of his accomplishments. Today we want to talk about behavior and perception. Most likely that is the goal of any coaching assignment, is change the behavior of the executive, and by changing the behavior, their stakeholders' perception will also change. Unfortunately, it is easier to change behavior than to change perception. In other words, you can change all you want, but if you don't tell people that you are doing so, most likely their perception will remain the same. And that is true because we see people in a manner according to a previous stereotype. So they will see you the way that you were, not necessarily the way that you are now after working with your coach to change behavior. And that is simply because we see what we think is there. We don't necessarily see what has changed. So in other words, if we think that you are a non-communicative person, despite the fact that you're working with a coach and making amazing changes on the way you are, my reality is that you're a non-communicative person and I will judge you on that behavior. You might change, but if people's reality has been different, their perception will stay the same. And that is the biggest challenge of traditional coaching, is changing the perception of the executives. Again, traditional coaching starts usually between two people, involves two people, the executive and the coach. They will find an action plan and they will work on specific behaviors that the executive need to change. The executive will go out and implement the action plan. Most likely, he will not involve any stakeholders at all, not in an official way anyway. He might tell them, but not in an official, constructive, methodical way. By doing that, it doesn't matter how much change is occurring in him. If the stakeholders don't see the change or are not aware that he's working on it, this perception will stay the same. This particular coaching might change behavior, but the perception might not change right away. Stakeholder-based coaching is a little bit different. It starts with the coach and executive, just like traditional coaching, but in addition to that, involves the stakeholders and the executive's manager. By doing this, the executive tells the stakeholders and the manager what he is working on and what changes is he trying to make. These people will actually notice a change and they will be aware of the efforts of the executive in changing that behavior. By doing that, the executive will change the behavior. At the same time, people will change their perception about him. It's a win-win situation. But how does that work? Usually starts with an initial assessment, most likely a 360-degree report. Most companies have already a 360 process in place. If there is none, the coach will do one for you or for the executive. The executive and the coach will select areas of development. What is it about 360 that needs to be improved? They both will create an action plan And this is where traditional coaching ends. The action plan is implemented by the coach. No stakeholders are involved. The executive most likely will change behavior, but the perception of the stakeholders will stay the same. The coaching process, however, once the action plan is created, the executive will review the action plan with the stakeholders and managers. And the stakeholders are the people that are most likely affected by the change in behavior that the executive wants to do. He will ask the stakeholders and the manager for advice and most likely for suggestions as to how to implement the action plan. This is what we call feed forward. Then he goes and implements the action plan by actively changing his behavior. 90 days later, or a month later, he will follow up with the key stakeholders. He will go and ask them, hey, you know, Mr. So-and-so, that I've been trying to change his behavior. Have you noticed any change? What other suggestions do you have for me to follow? By doing this, he is letting the stakeholders know not only that he's changing, but also taking in consideration their suggestion. Most likely, the stakeholders will start changing a perception before the change is completely done. 90 days after the initial assessment, the coach will measure the results. He will send a mini survey to the stakeholders and ask them, is Mr. Executive changing his behavior? To what extent? Any other suggestions you might have for him? He will review the suggestions and the results with the executive and will repeat the process as needed until both behavior and perception are changed. Does it work? Data and research says it does. 95% of leaders who consistently involve stakeholders in the process of changing behaviors improve their effectiveness. It's a formula for measurable change. And this is what is important, is measurable. Neither the coach nor the person undergoing coaching determine the improvement. Rather, it's determined by the stakeholders. And this is key, because at the end of the day, it's their perception what is important. Your behavior will make that perception. But in addition to that, is how you address that behavior and if you address their concerns from the beginning, that's how their perception is going to change over time. Stakeholder-centered coaching is not time-consuming nor difficult to understand. It's very simple. With the right guidance, you will be able to change your behaviors and change the perception of your stakeholders. It's not a theory, it's a proven process. More than 100,000 executives have gone through this process, and 95% of them have improved in a measurable, tangible way. It emphasizes on feed forward rather than feedback, meaning that you will go and ask your stakeholders ahead of time what is it that is important to them, how you can change that behavior based on their needs and wants, and you give it to them. And by doing that, they will know that you're serious about changing your behavior. And with that, I want to thank you very much